Hello and welcome to Behind the Story. I'm Michael O'Loughlin, America's National Correspondent and host of the podcast Plague, Untold Stories of AIDS in the Catholic Church. Today we'll be joined by Father William Hart McNichols. A lot of you probably know Father Bill from our podcast Plague. In episode 3, we hear Father Bill's story about his time as a young priest in New York when he dropped everything to devote himself to AIDS ministry. Today, Father Bill is a celebrated artist and iconographer. He's joining us from his home in New Mexico to talk a little bit about the similarities and differences between the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s and what we're going through today. Father Bill, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mike.
To start off, I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about the feelings of anxiety and fear that we're all feeling now and how that compares and contrasts to what people were feeling back in the 1980s and 90s.
Yeah, from the very beginning, when people did not know how AIDS was, contracted, there was a lot of fear. And if you wanted to work with people with AIDS, you had to go through a training that was sponsored by Gay Men's Health Crisis. Part of the training was they would ask you, okay, you go to visit someone with AIDS and you go into the bathroom. Do you use their soap? Do you use their towels? They offer you a glass of water or a glass of orange juice. Do you drink from the glass? Do you touch anything in the room? And all of that with AIDS, that was all okay to do. Still at that time, when people didn't know, there for about a year or maybe even longer, people were afraid. And there was, a palpable sense of fear. After I visited the first person, I wasn't afraid, but when I got home, I lived in the Jesuit retreat house in Manhasset, which has been since, taken down. I remember sitting in the chair and just kind of gasping for breath. Just what I had seen.
So it strikes me that back then, especially in the early days, like you say, there was a lot of fear because people weren't exactly sure how HIV was transmitted. And even once scientists and doctors figured it out, there was still a lot of misinformation. There was a need for education. And then it became clear that you could visit people, you could help them, with medical needs or even just cooking and cleaning. Today's a little different because we know that the best way to fight the spread of coronavirus is to actually stay apart, and that it is much more easily transmissible than HIV was back then. But there is still this feeling that we all we read the news and we're afraid of what we're hearing, what we're seeing happening out in the world. And I'm curious, were there any ways that you learned to cope with the fear and anxiety that you were living with as a caregiver back then, or that you offered to people living with HIV and AIDS that you think might apply to the situation today?
At the time, just like now, you had to develop some kind of spiritual life. And what I was doing at that time was I was illustrating children's books, and I illustrated about 20 books. So I was coming home after working in the hospice and drawing these children's books, which was a real kind of balanced that out. And I think when you said ways of coping or ways of dealing with it, it's funny because last night, because I knew I was going to be talking to you, my spirit lifted. It got brighter. And I always say that everybody has a pilot light inside of them, a little flame. And when you know you're going to be talking to someone about something spiritual and something uplifting, that pilot light goes into a larger flame. And then right now, it's just burning bright inside me because I get to talk about God and because I get to share the things that I've experienced.
I know that one thing we've seen people doing to try to combat the loneliness that we're experiencing, because a lot of us are isolating right now, is communicating with technology about spiritual things. We're talking during Holy Week, when normally churches would be packed and Christians and Catholics would be coming together and marking these very holy days, but we're kind of isolated. And I'm wondering, you touched on this a little bit earlier, tips for dealing with this feeling of loneliness that a lot of us are feeling right now. It's not easy for many people who are away from friends and families, and that was certainly the case back when you were doing AIDS ministry in the 80s. I'm just curious, was there anything that you turned to help combat those feelings of isolation that we're experiencing?
Well, at that time, we weren't isolated. And that's the major, or one of the major differences. People didn't have to quarantine themselves and be alone. What I've discovered during the past, I mean, I went on this wonderful pilgrimage with Jim Martin and Matt Malone and George Williams and a multitude of like 100 people. Right now, I'm painting a large 13-foot cross, and the corpus is 7 feet. So the model of that cross is right behind me. I had to do a model because I'd never painted anything that big. But what I've discovered is while I'm painting, different people come into my mind. The pilgrims, friends that I haven't talked to for years, people I haven't been in touch with. And once again, that flame, that pilot light, will grow brighter when you think of love.
Yeah, so you touched on two things that I've been hearing from people. One, kind of using a project or some kind of work, not to distract, but really to channel our energy and anxiety into. So you've turned your work into, it sounds like a sort of prayer for yourself, connecting you to people from your past, and then also connecting with people and making sure that we're not staying completely isolated during this time, but really using the available tools we have, whether it's video chat like this or even writing a letter to friends and loved ones, just to feel like we're staying connected. And speaking of staying connected, I had put out a request on social media before we talked today for people to give me questions that they want to ask you. And one question came from a person named Aiden Johnson. Aiden wanted to know which saints seem particularly apt as friends in prayer during the COVID crisis. And I know that you were instrumental in sort of linking Saint Aloysius to the AIDS crisis in the 80s. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about who he is and why you chose him, and the power of prayer with saints during times of crisis.
Hello, Aiden. Aiden is one of those people that I haven't talked to for years, and I smiled when you said it's Aiden Johnson. Every time I move, this is going to sound maybe a little bit, I don't know. Every time I move, a different saint is in the house. The house is dedicated to a different saint. So when I lived up in Taos, it was Rose of Lima. Then I moved to Arroyo Seco, and it was Hildegard. Then I moved down here, and it's Nicholas Black Elk, the Native American catechist, mystic, visionary.
So you see in the lives of the saints sort of lessons for today, even if you weren't anticipating finding them or knowing how they might apply to what we're going through today. You're able to draw strength and comfort from them, and that's one example there. I want to turn to another question. We're talking again during Holy Week, and I was struck that during your AIDS ministry in the 80s, you created and drew a Stations of the Cross for people living with HIV and AIDS. And in the episode of Plague, where we talk about your work, we actually interview someone who found great comfort in those Stations of the Cross after he was diagnosed with HIV. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about what prompted you to create those Stations of the Cross, and if there are any lessons in there that might apply to people who are afraid of sickness today.
What I did was I only used hands for the stations, and that was really important to me. Like the first station has these two hands bound, and that's Jesus is condemned by Pilate, you know. And then when Jesus meets his mother, it's sort of like two hands coming together. So I really loved working on them, and I loved drawing them, and they were printed in red because I wanted to, you know, the lifeblood to come through. Colors are all symbolic. So what I did was I took one person and walked him through the stations, and what happens to a person when they're first diagnosed, condemned to death. At that time, if you were diagnosed with AIDS, you were condemned to death. And what happens with the mocking and the falling 3 times, and Veronica, you know, offering her veil, and the final crucifixion. And I use one person, and then I go through all the things that people at that time, before AZT or anything, were going through. So you're able to walk with them.
Yeah, and what I was struck by was when we interviewed someone named Stephen, this person who really found comfort in your work during the height of the AIDS crisis with his own HIV diagnosis, was finding solace in the life of Jesus, which at the end was one of suffering, and knowing that Jesus understood the suffering that he was going through. That's how he put it to me. And so I just imagine that we'll share a link to how people can find these stations. I imagine that there's some comfort and hope in those prayers for people today who are afraid of illness, afraid of getting sick. So Bill, just as we wrap up, I want to ask another question that we got from social media. Back in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of stigma and fear around people who contracted HIV. Like we talked about, we didn't know how it was spread early on, and then there was a lot of stigma against people who became sick. And I'm just curious what you think about the uncertainty today. We still don't know a lot about coronavirus. We're not sure how it's spread, how many people will get sick, if you get sick, if you're able to heal. And I'm curious, not specifically about AIDS or coronavirus, but as a Christian, how do you deal with so much uncertainty and anxiety in life?
Oh boy, how much more time do we have?
I know you have about a minute and a half to answer that question. Explain suffering in 60 seconds.
That's like when the Dalai Lama was asked, "What is the meaning of life?" And he goes, "Oh, I don't know." that was a sort of funny, but no, what I intend to do and what I try to do is to keep working, like I said, on painting, and keep working on the cross I'm working on now. I find there are YouTubes out there of people doing wonderful things, trying to, you know, bringing lunches, bringing meals to hospital care workers and everything, and that lights that pilot light in me when I see people really helping and really giving of themselves, and it's a beautiful thing. Connecting with a certain person, like a saint, or of course our Lord, or our Mother Mary, and talking to them about what you're feeling and what you're fearing. But like I was trying to say before, the best thing to drive out fear is love, and that completely changes your interior. And I feel love when I read about Black Elk. You know, I feel love when I read about Hildegard. Edith Stein, she lived in the middle of a time which is unbelievable to us now. All of these people have been through similar things, and they've all found ways to connect with God and connect with other people, and that's why I go to them right now.
Great. So drawing from the rich history of the church's tradition of saints and finding lessons for today that might not be expected. So thank you, Father Bill. Father William Hart McNichols, the artist and iconographer, who we profile in our podcast, Plague, Untold Stories of AIDS in the Catholic Church. Bill's featured in episode 3, which you can listen to on our website at americamagazine.org/plague, or wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Michael O'Loughlin, America Magazine's national correspondent. For more videos like this, you can subscribe to America's YouTube channel and be sure to read the magazine at americamagazine.org. Thanks for watching.